On today's episode, we discuss the impact of losing a special player to this Texas football team like Jonathon Brooks.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. Now, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, the impact of losing Jonathon Brooks to this Texas football team. In the second segment, the keys, my 5 or 6 keys this week to beating Iowa State on Saturday and keeping your Big 12 championship and college football playoff hopes alive. And in the last segment, it's a little late, but better late than never, our recap of Texas beating Delaware State, the men's basketball team, on Friday night in their second game of the season. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So for the most part, it was a good weekend for the Texas football program. On Saturday, you beat TCU in your last matchup against them for a long time, right? 29-26 on the road. And then on Sunday, you were able to flip Wardell Mack from the University of Florida and get that commitment about a month out from National Signing Day, early signing day. So that's a really good pickup and a player that, should be an asset for this Texas football team in the near future. But we had a devastating blow, right? We got some pretty bad news on Sunday that Jonathon Brooks, who was looking like the best running back in the country and looking like the leading Doak Walker candidate, tore his ACL on Saturday against TCU. And, of course, he will miss the remainder of the season. And, I think with these college athletes, if you're a fan or, just somebody associated with the program, these injuries in college, they hurt more. They hit a little bit different than they do in the NFL. Obviously, injuries suck regardless, but when you look at college players, there's a shelf life, right? You know that they have eligibility, and somebody like Jonathon Brooks has already reached, enough eligibility to go to the National Football League. So you never know when is the last time you're going to see your favorite players in your favorite jerseys in college, right? We don't know if that image on Saturday of Jonathon Brooks crawling off the field, which is just gut-wrenching at this point, is the last time we're ever going to see him in a Texas jersey. Now, I know there's some rumors that he'll come back, and that would make the most sense at this point. But you don't know when he's going to be cleared to play or how effective he'll be when he is cleared to play, right? Whereas if you compare that to the NFL side, DeMarvion Overshown tore his ACL in the preseason, and obviously that sucks. He didn't get to have a rookie year, but he's still under contract for 3 more years for the Dallas Cowboys. So as a fan, as somebody who's a staff member on the team or just around the program, okay, even though we lost him his rookie year, we still have 3 more years to see DeMarvion Overshown play at a high level for the Dallas Cowboys, where, like I said, we don't have that guarantee, at least yet, that wasn't the last time we saw Jonathon Brooks in a Texas jersey playing for this football team. So knock on wood, I hope it isn't. But what's most important is that he makes a quick and, efficient and excellent recovery, and he's back to playing football at the high level we saw earlier this season. It really sucks for Jonathon Brooks because he was having a special season for a special football team. We talked about this Texas football team having Big 12 championship, college football playoff, and even national championship aspirations. And certainly one of the biggest reasons for that was Jonathon Brooks. And then you talk about the individual season he was having, right? After, waiting his turn and, sitting behind Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson, 2 NFL running backs, he was on, pace to make himself the third, right? And he finally got an opportunity starting in week 3 when he got the first start of his career to showcase what he could do, right? And since that point, he's played like the best running back in the country, and coupled with team success, with Texas being a national championship contender, he was on his way to winning the Doak Walker Award. And, it feels like that kind of just got taken away from him with 2 weeks left to go in the regular season. And also, it seemed as though that he was putting more money in his pocket with each performance because Mel Kiper had just made him the number 1 running back in the draft, right? And his prospect rankings. And obviously that's going to change as well with him tearing his ACL. So just really a tough scene for Jonathon Brooks, having one of the best years of his life, certainly of his career. And, it all comes crashing down with that tough injury, but hopefully, he can come back better than ever. Most players do from the ACL. in this day and age. And I'm hoping that Jonathon Brooks is one of them, whether that's, for the University of Texas or in the NFL, whichever one is his next stop. Coming into this season, we knew that Jonathon Brooks was a special player. We had saw him in, I think 2021 against Rice. We had saw him last year, I think, have over 100 yards against Kansas in mop-up duty. And we knew that if he had, the same opportunity that Bijan or Roschon got, or if he could start for this Texas football team, then we wouldn't lose too much production in the running game, right? And the rest of the country were telling us we were crazy for feeling like we could still have a really good running game even after losing Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. But we were not crazy at all, because if you look at the statistics through 10 games, Jonathon Brooks was more efficient running the ball than Bijan Robinson. So through 10 games, comparing Bijan last year and Jonathon Brooks this year, Bijan Robinson did have 19 more rushing yards than Jonathon Brooks does at this point. But Jonathon Brooks had 17 less carries, averaging 6.1 yards per carry compared to Bijan Robinson's 5.7 last year. And then Bijan Robinson had 2 more rushing touchdowns, 12-10. But essentially, they've given you the same exact amount of rushing production through 10 games. For anybody that saw Bijan Robinson for the last 3 years, you would certainly sign up for Jonathon Brooks to give you Bijan Robinson production through 10 games on the ground. And then through receiving, Bijan Robinson certainly had the edge, but Jonathon Brooks was no slouch, right? 314 yards last year through 10 games for Bijan, catching the ball 286, so only a difference of 28 yards and 1 touchdown for Bijan over Jonathon Brooks last year. So you're looking at through 10 games for Bijan last year compared to Jonathon Brooks this year, only a difference of about 47 scrimmage yards and 2 touchdowns, right? We all would have signed up for that for Jonathon Brooks coming into the season. Essentially, he has given us Bijan production as running back one of this Texas football team, and that's why he was on pace to win the Doak Walker Award this year. It just sucks tremendously for him, but also for this Texas football team, because he was the biggest part of our philosophy, and he was the biggest reason why we were a 9-1 football team, I believe, outside of this defense. When you look at this Texas football team, we're so enamored by the quarterback and Steve Sarkisian and all of our weapons on the outside, but this was still, even like last year, a power running football team, right? When you look at through 10 games on the season, they had run the ball 382 times compared to 320 passing attempts, right? So that is the philosophy of this football team. Even though we have all of these bells and whistles on the outside, we want to win games with the inside zone, power run, and dominating in the trenches with our offensive line. And that's what they had been able to do for the most part this season, which is why they were 9-1. They had run the ball 54% of the time compared to only passing the ball 46% of the time, which is surprising when you talk about the quarterback and the weapons we have on the outside. Now, maybe those numbers are a little skewed because we have won 9 out of 10 games, and in a lot of those games, you're running the ball significantly more than you're passing the ball in the fourth quarter to close those games. But the way I look at it is I'm a baseball fan, and for my baseball fans, Jonathon Brooks essentially for this Texas football team this year has been the starting pitcher and the closer, right? Because he's the one running the ball from the first through the third quarter, getting you in a position to close the game. And then he's the one you're giving the ball in the fourth quarter to close the game and get out of there with the win. So Jonathon Brooks has been the MVP of the offense this year. He's been the most important player on the offense this year. And like I said, for my baseball fans, he's been the starting pitcher and the closer for this Texas football team, which is why they are 9-1. And they are 34th in the country in rushing yards per game. It's around 185 rushing yards per game, something like that. Not elite, right? You would think elite out of 133 teams is probably the top 20, but 34 out of 133 teams is still one of the best rushing attacks in the country because you had the philosophy of a rushing football team, and you were allowed to have that philosophy because you had a dominant player at that position like Jonathon Brooks. And so now the question is do you maintain that philosophy without one of the best players in the country, or do you switch your philosophy and put the ball in Quinn Ewers' hands more, right? That's a lot to figure out with 2 games left in the regular season with everything on the line. But Steve Sarkisian is going to have to figure it out fast. Then when you look at Jonathon Brooks' production specific to the Longhorns, right? I said he's been the MVP of the Texas offense this year. 31% of our offensive yards have been accumulated by Jonathon Brooks this year. So essentially, 1 out of every 3 yards we have gained on offense this year was gained by Jonathon Brooks. 30% of our offensive touchdowns have been scored this year by Jonathon Brooks. So essentially 1 out of every 3 touchdowns we've scored this year have been by Jonathon Brooks. You just lost that to an ACL injury and have to find that production in the most important games of your season down the stretch. And when you talk about the next man up mentality, that's certainly what Texas is going to have to lean on for the rest of the season. But next man up doesn't always mean that the next man can produce as much as the last man, right? And that's certainly been the case this year between Jonathon Brooks and running back 2 Cedric Baxter. This is not to get on Cedric Baxter. Obviously, he's a young running back, and his best football is still ahead of him at the University of Texas. But if we're talking about the impact of losing Jonathon Brooks, having to rely on Cedric Baxter more is a consequence of Jonathon Brooks tearing his ACL. If you look at yards per carry through 10 games thus far, I know Cedric Baxter has missed a game, so it's still an average, but it's not exactly 10 games for Cedric Baxter. Jonathon Brooks, 6.1 yards per carry. Cedric Baxter, 4.5 yards per carry. Brooks has been a lot more efficient with his opportunities. Yards per reception, Jonathon Brooks, 11.4. We just saw that on Saturday with a 74-yard screen touchdown. Cedric Baxter, 5.3. So you're getting over double the production in the passing game from Jonathon Brooks that you are from Cedric Baxter, about 25% more production in the running game per touch than you are getting from Cedric Baxter. And then you look at 15-plus yard carries, right? Those explosive plays in the running game. Jonathon Brooks, 8.6% of his carries go for 15-plus yards. Cedric Baxter, only 4.5%. So I think you're taking a big hit to your philosophy and losing Jonathon Brooks. You are a power run football team. How much can you be a power run football team moving forward with Cedric Baxter as your starting running back? You're losing a ton of your production, right? 1 out of every 3 touchdowns you've scored, 1 out of every 3 yards you've gained. And we talk about next man up mentality, but that doesn't always ensure that the next man will be as great as the last man was. So prayers up to Jonathon Brooks, but this is a huge blow for this Texas football team moving forward. A quick word from our sponsors, and I give you the keys to beating Iowa State on Saturday. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free, where terms and conditions apply. All right, so this has become a reoccurring segment on Locked On Longhorns. The keys to beating our next opponent. Typically it's 5. I think this week I wrote down 6. So the keys to beating Iowa State on Saturday on the road without Jonathon Brooks certainly is going to be a tough road game for the Longhorns, but a game they should win to keep their Big 12 championship and college football playoff hopes alive. The first key is that Quinn is going to have to win this game with his arm, and I think that's something that this Texas football team is really going to have to do for the first time since the Alabama game, right? You didn't have a great running game against Alabama and Tuscaloosa. Quinn Ewers was able to win that game with his arm and explosive plays on the outside with JT Sanders, who had over 100 yards, and then Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell. I think it's going to have to be more of the same in this game. And Quinn Ewers struggled a little bit with Iowa State last year. We know Sark has struggled a little bit with that flyover defense, but I'm just not sure that you're going to be able to run the ball in dominant fashion the way that you have in the majority of your games this year without Jonathon Brooks and with Cedric Baxter getting the majority of the carries, right? I think it's going to have to be more of an effort where Quinn Ewers wins this game with his arm. Quinn Ewers takes pressure off of the running game with his arm, and then maybe you can close it down the stretch with the running game. But I don't think it's going to be a situation where Jonathon Brooks, like in the past, has carried us to victory. I think Quinn Ewers and his right arm is going to have to lead us to victory on Saturday against Iowa State. And then the running game is going to have to be a complement to what the passing game can accomplish this Saturday. I think we're going to need a big game from Xavier Worthy. I think the end of this game is going to look like the Kansas State, TCU, and U of H matchups where it's going to be a close one-score game, but I think the duration of the game is going to look different, right? I don't think we're going to be up 21-0 in this game like we were against U of H. I don't think we're going to be up 26-6 in this game like we were against TCU. I think it's going to be a dogfight throughout for 60 minutes and a bunch of lead changes, but I think it's going to be a one-possession game pretty much for the entirety of the contest. And in games like that, right, where 1 or 2 plays can be the difference, there is not one player on this Texas football team who can change the game with one play like Xavier Worthy, right? His speed, his superpower, you can use it at any time. And anytime he gets one-on-one coverage, he's a threat to score a touchdown from anywhere on the field, right? And so I think that in a game like this, we saw last week that Xavier Worthy, got back on track with Quinn Ewers. They certainly have a ton of rapport. I think in this game, his speed and his superpower could be the great equalizer in winning a close, tough, hard-fought matchup in the trenches that's, really going to go back and forth the whole game. So I see this being a really tight game at the end, but I think Xavier Worthy makes one or two special plays in this matchup on Saturday that tilt it towards the Texas Longhorns way. I think Quinn's going to have to win the game with his arm, and I think the biggest beneficiary of that is going to be Xavier Worthy. 100 scrimmage yards from Cedric Baxter on Saturday. This is something he's been able to do in a few games up until this point, but this is something that you would expected week in and week out from Jonathon Brooks, right? Whether it was in the rushing game or the passing game, he was going to give you over 100 yards from scrimmage. And even with Cedric Baxter this Saturday, I don't think it has to be as efficient as Jonathon Brooks was. Like I said, Jonathon Brooks was averaging over 6 yards a carry, over 11 yards of reception. I'm not saying that Cedric Baxter has to do that this Saturday, but I think if he can give you 100 yards of production himself, right? Whether that's on the ground, receiving, or both. I think that takes a lot of pressure off of this offense. I think it puts a lot of pressure on this defense, and I think it gives Quinn Ewers enough as a compliment to be able to go out and win this game on Saturday with his arm. So I don't think Cedric Baxter has to have a huge game. I don't think he has to have a Jonathon Brooks type game, even if he gets 100 yards on let's say 27 to 28 touches and it's not super efficient. I still think that 100 yards goes a long way into keeping Texas on the field, putting pressure on that Iowa State defense, making them, defend multiple things, and then giving Quinn Ewers enough support to be able to go out and win this game on Saturday. So 100 scrimmage yards from Cedric Baxter would help Quinn Ewers a lot and help Steve Sarkisian a lot in getting out of Iowa State with the win. The same thing I've asked the defense for the last 2 weeks. They've delivered. I'm going to ask them for it again. 3 sacks and a turnover. This Texas team had scored 30 points every game up until last week when they scored 29, right? Of course, the first time you don't score 30 points, you get as close as you can to scoring 30, right? With scoring 29. I think this is going to be another game, especially without Jonathon Brooks, where this offense fails to score 30 points again, right? So you're going to be in somewhat of a dogfight with Iowa State. And I've talked about how when you get a sack on a possession, their chances of scoring decrease significantly, right? When you get a turnover, obviously their chances of scoring decrease all the way to 0, right? Unless you get like a freak turnover like we did last week where you throw an interception and only use 3 yards of field position because you get the ball right back. But either way, right, we talk about, how did Texas blow a 20-point lead, or how did Texas blow a 17-point lead? And it's, things like us turning the ball over, things like us taking sacks and allowing these teams more opportunities, right? And so when you look at the end of the game and we won by 7 points, or we won by 3 points, or we won by 3 points the last 2 weeks, those sacks that you got against the opposing offense, those turnovers that you got against the opposing offense only get magnified, right? Because now these are plays that you made in a 3-point game. These are plays that you made in a 1-possession game, even though you may have gotten the interception when you were up 20, even though you may have gotten the sack when you were up 20. At the end of a 60-minute football game, those end up being some of the most important plays that led you to victory. So against Iowa State this Saturday, I think 3 sacks and a turnover will be enough for Texas to get out of there with the victory, because they'll be able to score enough points on the offensive end, and Iowa State won't be able to overcome 3 to 4 drives where they don't score the football. 6 to 28 on third downs the last 2 weeks from the offense. It was a problem under Malik Murphy. It continued to be a problem under Quinn Ewers. You were playing with fire, with turning the ball over the way you have the past 3 weeks, and you were playing with fire, not converting third downs the way you have the past 2 weeks. So like I said, 6 for 28 on third downs the last 2 weeks. You've also turned the ball over in 3 straight games. You cannot do that on the road in Ames, Iowa this Saturday and expect to come out with a win just because you're more talented than Iowa State. That is a good football team that goes out there and schemes really well and has given Texas and Steve Sarkisian trouble in the past. So you want to be more efficient on third downs, keep this offense on the field, and keep their offense off the field. And then you also definitely want to stop turning the ball over, because even though Texas has a ton more talent than Iowa State, the great equalizer is giving them more possessions than you get on offense that could lead to you leaving Iowa State with a sad plane ride back to Austin, Texas. But that's not going to happen, because the Texas football team listens to my show. They're going to follow my keys to victory, and they're going to beat Iowa State on Saturday and keep their Big 12 championship and college football playoff hopes alive. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we're discussing Friday night's matchup between the Texas basketball team and Delaware State, where Texas won 86-59. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Jace Medical. All right, just give me a second. All right, so this episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. The Jace case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jace case is to fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, jump on a quick call with one of our board-certified physicians. Get ongoing care from our physicians on any treatment-related questions. Doctor-created, doctor-recommended. Don't be caught unprepared. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Jace handles everything from online evaluations to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. If you or someone you love would get some peace of mind by having a year's supply of any daily medication, go to jacemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. All right, so we're talking about the Texas basketball team now, who picked up a win over Delaware State on Friday night, 86-59. Their next game is tomorrow night. I can't remember who I saw they play on the schedule, but they're back in action. So that's good to see. Rodney Terry for the 3rd game of the season, and this Texas basketball team. It beat Delaware State 86-59 on Friday night. And one thing that we noticed last year was this was a second-half team. There were a lot of games where they struggled to find footing in the first half. They were kind of in some tough matchups, even losing at halftime a lot of games. And they came out and blitzed teams in the second half. And that's what we saw in that scrimmage against St. Edwards, where they were losing and still ended up winning that game by 20-plus points. And in this game, they were only beating Delaware State by 9 in the first half, and then came out and beat them by 18, outscoring them 47-29 in the second half. So Rodney Terry showed last year that he was a really good coach in terms of making adjustments and, getting his team to respond to things that went negatively in the first half and go out there and do them positively in the second half. And through 2 games in the regular season thus far, it seems as though Rodney Terry is still doing an amazing job of making adjustments and coming out and playing Texas Longhorn basketball in the second half. When you look at the offense, they were the biggest reason we won this game on Friday night. The offense shot 53, 55, and 86 splits, 53% from the floor, 55% from 3. That'll win you a lot of games, and 86% from the free throw line, a huge improvement from the first game where they only shot 61%. So I'm glad they got back to, shooting from the free throw line like they're supposed to. They're free, right? Got to do that. Rodney Terry said the goal for each game is 22 assists, he said the goal for each game is 17 assists. They had 20 assists in the first game, 22 assists in the second game. Obviously, the level of competition will go up. And so, it'll be harder to maintain those assist numbers night in and night out against some of the better teams. But it's good early on that they're, sticking to his philosophy of sharing the basketball and, making sure everybody eats, because there's a lot of talent on this basketball team. Max Amos kind of had his coming out party, or at least his first coming out party, went 19 and 5 on 50% shooting. So 19 points and 5 assists. The 3 combo lineup, the 3 combo guard lineup that we've had has done really well this year, a la last year with Tyrese Hunter, Marcus Carr, and Serge Jabari Rice. Ithiel Horton, Max Amos, and Tyrese Hunter have looked really good in 2 games for the Texas basketball team. So like I said, Max Amos, 19 points, 5 assists on 50% shooting. Ithiel Horton has to be one of the steals of the transfer portal thus far, coming from UCF, 18 points and 3 assists on 63% shooting. And just talk about a flamethrower from the 3-point line, 5 for 6 from 3-point line. We were missing a dominant 3-point shooter last year. We may have found one in Ithiel Horton. He has 8 threes already through 2 games. He could certainly put the ball in the basket from anywhere on the court. And then Tyrese Hunter, 13 points and 5 assists on 57% shooting. So your 3 combo guards gave you 13 assists and all shot better than 50% from the floor. You're going to win a lot of games if that's the case. And then Dylan Mitchell, we talked about, him being a 5-star talent last year, but not really showcasing it too much on the basketball court. He was really just a rebounder and a lob threat. This year, he has become a lot more active in terms of rebounding, passing the basketball, and being involved in the offense, right? And not just being a lob threat, but actually creating opportunities for himself and others and, bringing the ball up the court, being a playmaker for this Texas offense. And in his second game, he shined 14 points, 11 rebounds, and 4 assists. That's certainly something that Dylan Mitchell is capable of doing on a night in and night out basis. And we know that a Rodney Terry-led basketball team wants to hang their hat on the defensive side of the ball. They held them to 40% from the floor and 33% from the three-point line, but they only got up 9 three-point attempts in 40 minutes. You're going to win a lot of basketball games holding teams to just 9 three-point attempts, regardless of how many of them they make. Now, this was a weird game because they forced 21 turnovers. So Delaware State did turn the ball over 21 times, but Texas turned the ball over 20 times themselves. So 41 combined turnovers is crazy. I think there were like 10 turnovers combined in the first 10 minutes, but that makes sense that they had 41 turnovers in 40 minutes. So you did a really good job in forcing them to be sloppy with the basketball. The problem is you matched their energy and you were just as sloppy with it. So they obviously have to clean that up, but you'll win a lot of games if you can force teams to turn the ball over 21 times and only shoot 40% from the field. So really good 2 early matchups for the Texas Longhorns. They came out and even if they played with their food at times, beat up on 2 teams that they were supposed to beat really bad. Hopefully that continues to be the case as this team builds chemistry and cohesion amongst each other. And obviously in December or January, you're getting that big boy back in Dylan Dessou, and this should be at that point one of the best teams in the country overall. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. They say it's a 65% chance that Quinn Ewers returns to the Texas Longhorns next year. We discuss on tomorrow's episode what that would mean for Steve Sarkisian and this football program. Hook 'em. Peace.